The statue is of Albertus Magnus. He was the leading scholar of the Middle Ages and the teacher of Thomas Aquinas, and I couldn't help but remark that it was appropriate for our state, since in many ways we're still in the Middle Ages. I had a brother that was a year older than I, and he couldn't say sister. So it predates all other stuff. And when I first ran, it was that long, long name with my maiden surname in it, Francis Tarleton Farenthold, which I finally just said to people, it's the longest name on the ballot. You know, I didn't want to take that much time telling them what it was. And in 72, when there was all this about, you know, how I would, in quotes, be presented, and it was back to Francis, they thought Sissy was frivolous or something. I said, it doesn't matter, do what you want, but that name's going to surface. I was 19 when I got out of Vassar, and I couldn't conceive of just sitting at home. As my father used to say, he thought it was sort of pitiful to see young women that got out of college then to just sit and sort of wait to be married, and that was much in the kind of tradition. So I had encouragement to do other things, and I went to law school, and as strange as it sounds, it was almost the line of least resistance, simply because there were many lawyers in my family, and it was a kind of tradition. Had I decided to go back to New York or something like that, I'm sure I'd have had a lot more trouble with it.
How many women in your graduating class at law school?
As I recall, there were 3.
Out of?
Well, it seemed to me at one time there were 3 out of 800. And interestingly enough, 25 years later, when I go to the Texas legislature, it's just about, I'd say, the same ratio. There were 149 men in the House and 1 woman. I think personally that I would have been in torment had I not gone on, as difficult as it has been to lose and lose as decisively as I did, because I just didn't think the scenario had been completed on reform. And it hasn't been, as far as I'm concerned, but I did what I could, and that's it. Well, I was very late coming to any opposition to the Vietnam War. I had been brought up on that bipartisan foreign policy, that kind of notion that if foreign policy was beyond the ordinary citizen and the ordinary voter, and let those that know so much more make the decision. And President Johnson was coming back home to Texas in January of 1969, and a resolution was introduced asking him to come and address a joint session of the legislature. But as I read the resolution, it went beyond that. It commended his administration. And I read and reread that, and there wasn't any way to read it without it including Vietnam. Maybe I wanted to find a way not to have Vietnam included. I don't know. I know I was terribly troubled about it.
What do you think it is that impelled you to say no?
I think you ultimately have to do what you think is right, and then take the chance of being thrown out or whatever.
You're not going to stay out of politics.
I don't know. Let me say one thing. I learned, and you know, this kind of thing can be seared into you, as it was with me in 74, that if you don't have the resources of a corporate entity, you're not considered viable. And I'm not speaking just...
By who?
First, by the entire gambit of the media. I saw that in 74. Time and time again. There'd be only one question the reporters were curious about. Was I raising any money? And this was right in the wake of Watergate and all. So, and I won't try again. You know, I thought I'm strong-hearted or just maybe mule-headed, as people have described me, and we can get this coalition together. We can move in the field of reform, but your wings are clipped.
Do you have regrets that you became a public figure and went through these experiences?
Oh, not a bit. You know, again, I guess that goes back to what I said originally about having a lot of curiosity. And as searing as, let's say, like 74 was, there undoubtedly it was. I learned a lot from it. I learned a lot. I also learned how much more control there is than I thought there was. And you see, all my activities basically have been on the state level. And I always wanted to stay there, is the irony of it, because it always seemed to me that state government still could be manageable. It still has so much to do with the everyday life of human beings. And so maybe people are always saying I'm pessimistic, so I don't want to overstate it for that reason. But when I read that thing that the French scientist said that by 2025 our oceans would be dead, I couldn't help but think, and then I think, here I'm still thinking in industrial images of a car careening with the brakes gone. We had the power, we had the resources for leadership since World War II. And where are we now? Since early on in the Cold War, I've had a deep, deep fear of nuclear holocaust. I don't understand some of the policymakers. And I imagine that things are even more fearful than we're aware of. And I suppose it's supposed to be one more example that the American people can't sort of consume the truth. And for some, I guess, a retreat into a very private life is the only thing that makes any sense. At this point, it would be difficult for me to see that. My daughter once told me, she said, "Well, Mom, all the rebelling you did was really more symbolic than anything." Maybe she's right. I hope not.